Welcome, listeners. This is episode 8 of Tales from the Bridge. I'm Tristan.
I'm Kevin.
And I'm Marty.
And I'm Sam.
In this episode, we talk about To Say Nothing of the Dog by Connie Willis. And we've got a little new side project we're all going to work on. Marty's going to talk about that. We end off with some Star Trek trivia, the original series. But right now, let's go see what Kevin's got for us. All right, let's make our way over to the bridge.
Well, science fiction, science fact. I wanted to start out by talking about farm equipment because that's always such an exciting science fiction topic.
I don't believe in farm equipment. That is totally fictional.
So yeah, usually not typically associated with science fiction, but I read this article, and I don't know if you guys heard about this, but it says, farming robot kills weeds with lasers. And I thought, oh, that sounds cool. And I looked at it, and if you can imagine what this company is doing, called Carbon Robotics, it's built what looks like those farm sprayers that spray herbicides or things like that. The really big wheeled ones you see driving down the road sometimes that if you're on a motorcycle like me, you're really tempted to drive underneath. I'm sure that's just me. But anyway, it looks like that, except it doesn't spray anything. It just drives through crops, and it's got like a bank of 20 cameras that points downwards, and when it sees a weed, it blasts it with a freaking laser.
Oh, wow.
And apparently it can kill 100,000 weeds in an hour by zapping lasers downwards. No herbicides, nothing like that. And I thought that's kind of brilliant, because if you cook a plant in the soil, I guess it burns it, and that's nitrogen, right? You get the ash would be good for the soil, and carbon and all that kind of good stuff. And they're completely automated, so they drive up and down the rows. And science fiction. Here we are today with farming equipment that's blasting 100,000 weeds an hour with lasers.
Well, thank God for Reagan's Star Wars program, to which we can now thank the development of lasers cheaply enough that they can be fired to burn weeds.
I just want to know if I can rent it at Home Depot. Like, is that
for the
Soon.
Weekend? Yeah,
yeah, just for the
over
weekend.
the lawn.
I would totally do that.
Like an iRobot for outside. Put it on your lawn, and it just goes around and zaps. Yeah. Anyway, that was interesting. But I also wanted to revisit, if I could. Do you guys remember when I talked about that Pong playing monkey, who talked about controlling he controlled the controllers with his mind? Neuralink, right? That was an Elon Musk initiative. Some academics, some people in universities actually did something cool, which was they took similar technology with neural links, kind of like what Elon Musk's Neuralink, and they were able to help somebody who was a paraplegic and locked in, so unable to speak, communicate by thinking about handwriting. So what they did is they put 200 electrodes into the motor cortex of this person's brain, who hasn't been able to speak for a long time. I don't know if it was an injury, but in any case, he had an inability to communicate or to talk or to do anything. And they got him to think about writing the letter A, or handwriting, and then think about handwriting the letter B, etc. And they trained a machine learning algorithm to be able to identify those brain patterns. So now this locked-in individual who is unable to speak or feed himself or anything can now write at 90 characters a minute by thinking about handwriting. And it's 95% effective.
Holy smokes.
Isn't that amazing?
That's great. Super. Good for them. Yeah, yay, brain control.
Wow. That's right.
So that in the future, people will be able to precisely control things with their minds.
Mm-hmm.
That must take a lot of concentration.
I would imagine. Well, and it's funny because we were thinking about this last time when we were talking about the monkey and said, well, what are the practical applications? And somebody said, well, for paralyzed folk, and here they're doing it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Crazy. Good. Well, it's a bright science fiction world for us all in the future. This will take us right to Ready Player One, and then through to Ready Player Two, with the mind interface.
Something else I want to share with you guys, and this one's super duper cool. It involves pirates and flying people. So I don't know if anybody has seen these viral videos over the last week or so of a Royal Navy marine folk in the UK using one of those hand arm jet devices to fly off of a Zodiac to land on the deck of a battleship.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so this was, I mean, it's just amazing eye candy because there's this army guy flying through the air and landing on a Navy ship, so that's just cool. But the reason for it, as I understand it, is they have a real problem of boarding other boats, in particular when they're doing searches of you know of other boats looking for contraband, or if they're actually boarding pirate boats. So they see this as a tool for boarding a boat quickly and lowering down ropes for the rest of the army folk to be able to climb up. So, imagine being a pirate and you're running away from a UK military boat, and all of a sudden some dude flies out and and he lands on your boat and starts chucking ropes off the side.
Yeah. Wow.
We finally got our jetpack, and the future is here. It turned out to be a forearm pack, which actually makes more sense. That's cool. I never understood that.
Like Iron Man.
Yeah.
Well, it makes sense. Because your steering is that would become muscle memory, right? The way that you move your arms.
Yeah.
And I guess you can hold your body weight up from your arms, so it makes some sense.
Yeah.
Well, and that's always been the most vulnerable time in any ship attack, right? The climbing over, you've got your sword in your teeth, right, effectively, and you're like incapable of actually attacking or defending yourself. So that's. I remember years ago we heard, years and years now, but at the time it was super weird that like some pirates had attacked a rich person's ship, like a cruise ship, and the crew pulled out these like sonic guns, right, with like a dish and they just like went along the edge of the ship and went boo, and all the guys climbing the side of the ship fell off. They were like, I think they were microwave, either sonic or microwave. Anyway, and I never heard this. I've never seen one of these guns. Never heard of it. What the hell is this, right? And then it sort of made the news, and they sort of announced, oh yeah, we have these crowd control things, and you never hear about them again, right? But there's all sorts of like wacky tech, I'm sure, accessible to the rich, which we don't even know about.
Pretty freaky stuff that if you're the pirate to see like a squad of say 6 to 8 guys suddenly flying through the air and
you're done.
Probably best to just kind of go, hey, it's yours. We participated in pirate interdiction when I was in the Navy. Our whole point of being there was to protect that sea lane, and it is a known area for pirates, and so they would have Navy SEALs and explosive ordnance guys fast rope out of helicopters usually onto one of our oilers to do a practice ship takeover. And that was always the conversation, is like, we're sort of, leaning up against our gear, looking at the show, kind of going, that helicopter's hovering there for a long time, and pirates have guns. So it seems like, so there's a lot of period of exposure there. And then, if you go up on a sort of small craft, go alongside, you got to try to pitch your ropes over. Again, like, you're at a pretty big disadvantage there, right? Like, so there's a whole, I mean, I'm not by any means a combat expert on that. And again, I was always at a great distance because they did a lot of these things just sort of far enough away that we would only kind of get a glimpse or a sense of it here and there. And they would practice fast roping on the flight deck sometimes, but it always just seems like that is a big whirly thing, just hovering there for a good couple of minutes. And I don't know, if I had an AK, I couldn't miss at this distance. So,
well, it makes you think about just the evolution of technology and how the military has always had that. And World War I and II, think about what they had less than 100 years ago. We're going to see it on the news. There's going to be 50 of these guys, and it's like an army of Iron Man and other superheroes. I don't think that's that far away from being science fiction. That's a science fact soon.
So I was just perusing the nominees for Hugo and Nebula Awards for 2021, as well as the Locus Awards, and the 2020 BSFA winners which has already happened, and a lot of the same books were nominated. And well, I noticed there were 4 books that were nominated for Best Novel for both the Nebula and the Hugo, and there's 4 of us. So as a little sub-project for our reading club, we thought, well, we'd each read one of these and report back and tell you how they were. So at least this is a little bit of a kickoff to tell you that what those 4 books are, and then maybe we can talk a little bit more about the authors. So Piranesi by Susanna Clarke is up for both the Hugo, the Nebula, and the Locus, I believe, or the BSFA. And then The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin also is up for all 3 of those awards. Black Sun is up for the Hugo and the Nebula, and Network Effect is up for the Hugo and the Nebula. So, since we like well-decorated novels, we're going to just sort of read our way through those and report back in a future issue.
Well, I've got the Martha Wells Network Effect book, and this is the 5th book in the Murderbot Diaries series that she's written. And this is the only novel in this series. All the rest of them have been novellas, all around maybe 150, 160 pages. And so this one was nominated for Best Novel, and so far it's great.
Well, I'm reading Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. I don't know much about it at all, but I'm probably going to listen to this one. I don't know anything about it, so it's going to be interesting going into this one.
Well, we do know. Let's see. We know a few things. Rebecca Roanhorse is an Aboriginal writer, I think, First Nations writer, and the whole thing is set in a very, I don't actually know if it's Mayan or Inca or Aztec, but sort of South American mythological world, I think, which is a little bit actually like, reminiscent of our last book that we read with A Memory Called Empire. And how about you, Sam? What are you reading next, or for this little cycle?
Yeah, I've got Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. You're probably familiar with Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which was published in 2004. There was an HBO series, and I'm a big fan of that book. I thought it was fantastic. And so this was 16 years ago. This was 16 years between books. She published this in 2020, and it's nothing like Strange and Norrell. It's definitely its own piece. It's like more fantasy than sci-fi, and it's more almost has a feel of like a Twilight Zone episode.
Nice. And then I'm reading N.K. Jemisin's The City We Became, which I'm also about halfway through. I could report some impressions. I love N.K. Jemisin's writing. Everything I've read by her so far has been like, I've just been blown away by the evocative, poetic kind of language, the literary quality of what she writes. So this is The 100,000 Kingdoms is her fantasy trilogy, which I've read, and the Broken Earth trilogy, which is her sci-fi, which she won a Hugo for every book in the trilogy and made history. And so she's a very highly decorated author that I've really enjoyed. So I was quite looking forward to reading The City We Became, which is a book, and I think is going to be a trilogy based on this short story that we had read for the book club, actually. So it was The City Born Great was the title of the short story.
The book that we all read this past month was To Say Nothing of the Dog by Connie Willis. To Say Nothing of the Dog, or How We Found the Bishop's Bird Stump at Last. I wanted you guys to read this kind of just to change things up a little bit. Also, I had just come off of a couple of darker books that were like really heavy worlds, death and destruction. So I think that when I read this book, I was like, oh, fuck, I had a blast, I had a lot of fun. And that's, I think, what I kind of wanted you guys to experience out of it as well. But I do feel like I went out on a limb a little bit because it's not, I mean, if it's not your cup of tea, then you're not going to like it. Actually, I think we should continue this whole segment in English accents if you guys are up for it.
Right-ho, chap.
Only if they're regionally specific.
Jolly good. No, it's not okay. It's not okay.
Yeah, it's not okay.
We can continue the whole thing in Monty Python lines from here on in.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I really like about this book as well is I love nostalgia, and there's something very nostalgic about this book. It mocked many things in history, and then it mocked, or at least, or more so, maybe borrowed from a lot of the good stuff, the classics. To Say Nothing of the Dog was the subtitle for Three Men in a Boat. So a lot of the themes and the comedy that you get out of that book, which I have not read, is it Jerome?
Jerome K. Jerome, I believe.
K. Jerome, yeah. So I would love to read that, because if I like this, I must like that. And that was written in the late 1800s, 1890s. It kind of felt like a Noel Coward play, the upstairs, downstairs kind of thing, in one door, out the other door. And it just had fun. There was nothing at stake. That's something I find very interesting as well. One of the strongest themes of the story is that everything's incidental. There's not much at stake at all. But
it's the entire space-time continuum that's at stake all the time. It's just
right.
What it depends on is utterly trivial, which is kind of an interesting point too, right? That the utterly trivial is actually super important, because it's all super important, because it's a chaotic system and everything. Everything contributes to the ultimate. But yeah.
But if you really think about the main object, which is the bishop's bird stump, it's ridiculous to begin with, just to think about that, and then to actually visualize it, you kind of can't. There's a brief description of what it did look like, but that seemed incidental also. Some described it as ugly and some described it as beautiful. I also love the characters. Almost every single one of them I loved. But my favorite character is Cyril, the dog, because the whole way through, I felt like I watched this whole stupid thing unfold as if I was that dog that just sat and watched. And whenever there was a dramatic moment in the plot, moving to a different direction, or something being resolved, and then the next little issue to have to figure out, Cyril just goes along with it and observes. And I relate to that character because that's how we read it, or at least I did, where it was just on the outside looking in like a lazy dog, because it doesn't matter. Cyril didn't care what happened. Everyone else in the story did. I hope you guys enjoyed it, but I completely understand if you did not. I could have been in a certain place in my life where I read this book and was just like, what is this? I'm not doing this. So if you guys are at that point,
time for this.
Yeah.
What are you talking about now? Yeah. Well, I will certainly play the other side of that debate, but I'd love to hear Sam and Kevin first. So before I trash this book, man.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I thought a lot of the literary references went over my head. Like I obviously, like you said, Tristan, she's American, so she must be an Anglophile to be so into British history and British literature, and she did a great job. And it was a caricature. Of course, it was a caricature of Victorian England. And of what it is to be British, and what's important to British people, even in the Victorian times, but also in the 1940s during World War II, which also played a part in this book. So well researched, but you'd have to be very well read around kind of English history and literature to catch a lot of those references. But enough of them I did, and I really was able to dig into a little bit the thinking around the time travel as well, because this idea of not being able to change the future is actually an interesting theory. Like, it's this idea of self-correction, that if we live in a singular timeline, if time travel were capable, one way to avoid a small number of paradoxes is that this self-correction stops the future from changing. And then you could instantly jump on that as a problematic theory, because at what point does that take place? Is it long in the future that it self-corrects? And what's the decision point that does it self-correct 80 years in the future, or is it 20 years in the future, or 100 years? But anyway, it's a neat concept. And in fact, that became very salient at the end of the book, which I won't talk too much about.
Right.
But no, it is like that's what a good sci-fi story is about, is taking some concept in science fiction, time or space travel, and running with it. What would happen if this were the nature of the of space-time continuum, which is what Connie Willis has done here. And the theories that she talked about with, you might cause a disruption if you were able to bring something forward, and we can model that in some ways. And so maybe this cat, by bringing, what's the cat's name again? Princess Arjumand. Arjumand. Bringing Princess Arjumand forward might have created these disruptions, and that needs to be rectified. But then if we believe her theories, then really you just throw up your hands and say, well, what will be is will be. It is what it is, and it's going to self-correct. But what I thought was great was, like you said, Tristan, there wasn't a big plot that needed to occur. Like, there wasn't something terribly frightening that needed to be solved. However, it still is a bit of a page turner, because each of the little vignettes are exciting enough that you want to know what's going to happen. Is this character going to be able to propose to this other character, or are they going to be able to find the cat? Is he going to be able to find the can opener? Right? She presents it in a way that is entertaining, and and of course the characters are in a lot of ways, these stories the characters have to be a little bit annoying, but that's necessary for this sort of farcical book to work, I think. You can't have those unbelievable situations occur without those caricatures of Victorian England and those spoiled rich kids, and so yeah. I mean, I thought it was great. At no point did I start yawning, and at no point did I think, I don't really want to finish this. And it's very different from All Clear. Even though it's the same theme, the tone of that book was not like this at all. It wasn't nearly as lighthearted. In fact, it was much darker.
Well, I was wondering, because the tone of Doomsday Book is completely different as well, the other one that I've read, than this one. And so I wondered if she discovered a sense of humor after she wrote Doomsday Book, and then wrote funny books since then, but apparently only just the one.
And I didn't read Blackout, but All Clear was definitely a lot darker. But anyway, I thumbs up it, Tristan. I enjoyed it, and I like Connie Willis. I think she's a great author.
I enjoyed this book. It was it hit me at the right time. I needed a sort of lighthearted, easy read that was almost sort of has a sort of Zen-like quality when you're reading it, because the stakes are so low. Characters are likable, and I'm rooting for them, and let's go for just take a boat down the river and see what happens. We got to find a cat. That's cool. There's hints at stakes at losing World War II as a result of this cat and that sort of thing, but it's pretty inoffensive. Kind of found it relaxing, but it also felt like a novella that was forced into a much longer book. I kind of feel like that space would have been better used by building up the world and giving us more about the time that they were time traveling from. I wanted to know more about that and the characters they were hinting at. And again, I didn't read any of the other books, so maybe I would have, if I had, I would have come in with that knowledge. But reading it as a standalone is okay. I would have liked, like I said, I wanted to know more about the world that they're time traveling from, the apparatus, and
I feel the same way about that too. I remember wanting to know more about the 2050s. And even with Doomsday, they don't. I mean, you spend more time there, but you still actually don't get much information about what it's like. So,
yeah. Same with All Clear. All Clear actually has less in the future than this book.
Oh wow!
like overall, I enjoyed the book, and it was a fun read, and it was a nice break. It was kind of a comic relief. So the other stuff that we've been reading, and so that's nice too. It is a sort of like you say, a kind of upstairs, downstairs with time travel. So like that's new. I want to try that.
All right.
And let me put my boxing gloves on here.
All right. I'll get my
No,
gear on. Well, no, I mean, I'm also happy I read this book. I'm not happy I read Doomsday Book before it. I think that's what kind of ruined this for me. I bit off a little more Connie Willis than I could chew in 1 month and decided I was going to read Doomsday Book and then To Say Nothing of the Dog, which was entirely unnecessary. There's really no reason to read those books in sequence. And Doomsday Book really broke my trust in this author. Like, I had a really, really terrible experience of Doomsday Book, I gotta say. I mean, I'm glad I also read it in the end. It's on the Hugo and Nebula winning list, so at some point I had to get through it. I'm glad that To Say Nothing of the Dog motivated me to get through the Doomsday Book. But she writes too many words, and some editor really should come along and like at least cut out 100 pages of every book she writes, because Doomsday Book was a 600-page book that should have been 300 pages shorter, and I'd say To Say Nothing of the Dog was, a 500-page book that should have been 200 pages shorter, maybe one. I mean, now they were completely different books. I was just a little tired of her style by the time I got there, and it's not nearly as bad. I mean, all the things that really got to me in Doomsday Book, which was that her characters just don't ask the obvious questions. They bumble around like complete idiots. They just aren't with it at all, and they're constantly interrupting each other, and everything's just a jumble, and it's like a farce. And I'd like to see that on stage. I'm not sure I'd like to read that though. Like, oh geez, all these people talking over top of each other, ignoring what they're saying, like that's part of the humor, and that's good. And I love British humor, but I love that kind of British humor dialed up to Monty Python, like where that crosses the threshold of bizarre and hilarity to me, where I like laugh a lot. This was like, this was more like tittering. Oh, that's amusing. It wasn't Monty Python level. It was like tittering about the idiosyncrasies of the upper classes of British 18th and 19th century Victorian England, and I was like, okay, that's okay for 100 pages, but 400 is too many. So that's what I'll say that I didn't quite like about it. It didn't quite cross enough of the thresholds to be funny, but also have stakes. I like having stakes in my books too. I think this was a little too much. I do appreciate the ultimately Tolkien-esque message that it's the little guy that counts, right? But the real deep message of her whole world is that every detail matters. The entirety of the space-time continuum and all of future history depends, on all the things that happening. and there's all these tiny little chaotic bits, of people that could make small decisions. I mean, I think the whole moral of the story was in when somebody asked, what do you think could have changed the Battle of Waterloo for Napoleon? And he was like, it's none of those things. It's a rat or a cat or it was something that nobody thought of. It would have been some bizarre little, non-event that blew into a chaotic mess that changed the outcome of history.
Napoleon's hemorrhoids.
What's that?
Napoleon's hemorrhoids, I think.
Napoleon's hemorrhoids, yeah. Or a kid crossing the street at the wrong time and slowing down a guy who didn't get the thing in time. Like, that's what history is, and I like that message. And I like her world. The self-healing time travel story is, I think, the most interesting one that there is for me. I think that's the hardest way for the universe to work out. I think if time travel is possible, it has to be in such a way that nothing ever changes and the single timeline is preserved. And that's really hard to do. And so I do appreciate what the last 100 pages of this book and of Doomsday Book probably are great, good. and I like what she does with the story. It is a complex story that came together, and there's a shift in perspective at the end when you realize, oh, the problem isn't what I thought the problem was. She's been alluding to all these things along the way that turn out to be, now I see why. The story is a little bigger than I expected. It reaches into the future in a way that I think, is interesting. So I like the story she weaves, and I like what she does with mixing genres. But this is a book that is really a mystery novel mixed with a parody, like a British mild humor parody of social classes and stuff, mixed with a sci-fi sort of, set of themes and resolution. And that's neat. Nobody else does that. I think it's a one-of-a-kind book for sure. And I did laugh out loud at least a couple times, maybe only once, but it was worth it. And so, she does cross the threshold enough times to make this book worth reading. We've been on this kick of reading female sci-fi authors, many of them highly recognized and decorated. Connie Willis has won a bunch of the Hugos and Nebulas, and so maybe I can just, with that, move us into the next segment, which is the book I want you guys to read next month. And it is called A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers, which I really enjoyed. I was taken by surprise a little by this book. I thought it was going in a way that made me reinforce my prejudices about writing styles and certain kinds of science fiction. But she won me over. She won my heart. If you're a sappy kind of person and you're willing to just give yourself to a book, I think this book is wonderful. It's a character story. It's about people. And those people are all sorts of different species of alien and AI and whatever else in the world. That is the sort of moral core of this book, is that they're all people. We're all people, and it's a positive world view. It's a sci-fi world that she's built that's kind of it's, I don't know if I'd say realistic, but it's kind of like realistic in the way that the Expanse is. It's sort of a relatively near future, plausible technology kind of stuff. There's nothing fantastical, no gravity drives. Well, there's punching through the manifold. I suppose there is some. But anyway, it's about aliens. There's lots of aliens kicking around. They're all interacting. They're all living together. They're working on ships together. It's a little bit, I'd say, like Firefly that way, and the world, the sort of cowboy world of free enterprise shipping around. But she wraps it up beautifully. I think it's a great ending. It's a great single contained story, and I'm glad I read it. So
nice. That
anything
sounds
else to say about that? Yeah. So Becky Chambers.
Great.
It's part of a series. It's part of a series.
It is
too,
part
right?
of a series. So the story of this series is really interesting. So it's worth noting that this is a self-published book, The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. She Becky Chambers was working in theater, I believe, like backstage management kind of stuff. Decided she really believed in her writing, and those are the sci-fi stories, are the stories that she really wants to write. She wrote as much of this book as she could on the side, and then she ran a Kickstarter campaign to just fund herself for a few months, I think only, to be able to finish the book. She finished it. She self-published it. And then just by word of mouth, people started hearing about it and knowing about it, and it got recommended, around and around and around until a bigger publisher picked it up, republished it in much larger volume, I'm sure, probably around the same time that she published the sequel, which was a Closed and Common Orbit. Now, the sequel was nominated for a Hugo. By now, buzz was out. This was the going concern. People had heard about these books. People loved the first one, but it had missed the nomination because it was too small. So then the second one was nominated, and I'm not sure if the third one was, but it didn't win the award any of those times, the first three books of the series. But then in, I think, the third or fourth year, she won the Hugo for Best Series. So they gave it for the whole trilogy. Now, each book is a standalone story, although the first two books are related. It's sort of a character from the first story that moves in to star in the second story. And I think the third book is not, maybe it's the same sort of minimal overlap, but they're basically standalone stories in Becky Chambers' universe. And then there's been a fourth novella, I think she just published last year, that also goes in this universe, and it's called To Be Taught, If Fortunate, which I just picked up for my wife for her birthday, so I will be reading it for myself, obviously. It's interesting reading reviews on Goodreads of her and of Connie Willis, honestly. Right? But every book, Nevernest too, but every book people love it and hate it, and there's sometimes some people in between. But people like really different kinds of books, and there's some people like you read the reviews of The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and largely, right, has good ratings. Largely, it's people like me that were like, "Oh, she won me over. Oh, I cried. It was so great. I love the characters. It was beautiful. Blah blah blah." And then there's somebody that comes on like, "This was such a fucking boring book. Like, nothing fucking happened in here." And you read that as someone who loved the book and be like, "Oh, you just didn't get it. You just, you didn't get in the spirit of the thing, right?" And I've been totally on the other side of that with other books, right, where I'm like, "I hated this book.
Well,
I think don't know why anybody reads this."
It shows how you go into a book, right? Like the person that said nothing happened went into that book looking for a big story. Mm-hmm. So when they got a book that was about characters, they were disappointed. And if they were going into the book looking for characters and not a big story, they would have been like, "Oh, this is great." Yeah, I'm noticing that a lot with the reading so much lately, is that going into it affects how you accept it.
Totally.
Anyways.
Yeah, it's true. In context, what you've been reading lately, what movies you've been watching. And...
Yeah, I always find myself sort of bringing that up. Like, what's the context I've read this in or took this in at the point in my life, or where was I and what kind of headspace I was in? Because I can actually make the difference between me liking something or totally hating it, right? Like it's weird. Like there are times where I'm totally open for something, and then other times where I'm just not. And I've reread books years later and was like, "Oh no, I really love this book," and I hated it at the time. I couldn't even finish it, right? Like that sort of thing has happened to me before.
So that's what's next.
Sounds great. Looking awesome. At it here, it looks exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got some trivia. What do we got?
So for trivia, I've got Star Trek 1.0 trivia game. Warp 1 level questions. So, what officer had the authority to order Kirk's confinement on the ship?
Well, it's got to be Dr. McCoy.
I'm thinking McCoy as well.
All right, so Warp 1 is too easy for you guys.
Well, who else would have the authority to override McCoy. Captain, right?
Yeah.
In the episode, The Trouble with Tribbles, how did Mr. Scott get the Tribbles onto the Klingon ship?
Oh, yeah.
And that's one of the most iconic episodes.
Wasn't just one smuggled on board inside of clothing or a bag or something, and then it replicated?
Was this the little furry creature, fur ball thing?
Yeah.
Is that a Tribble?
Yeah.
It just multiplied on the Enterprise.
Like rabbits, only more so.
I don't remember exactly how that.
I don't either, but I feel like it was smuggled in clothing.
You just beamed them over on the transporter.
Oh.
Come on!
It's almost a trick
How else
question.
would you do it?
I'll give you one more. All right. Which ancestry does? But I do love that you guys overthought this one. That one that gives me hope. You guys
corrected that.
What ancestry does Spock more closely resemble? His human or alien?
Human.
I think it's alien.
I'm gonna go right down the middle and say it's equal. It's 50-50.
According to Star Trek: The Game, his alien half is Dalton.
Oh, see, the game people and me, we're aligned.
The alien half. They must make some reference to that somewhere.
They must.
I just figured on the basis of him actually being a human actor, it was a safe bet.
But if you really think about it, it's so true. The answer is so true because he is a Vulcan and he has moments where his human side really comes out. But through and through, he's Vulcan. He just has these odd moments, these odd human moments that come out. So that makes total sense.
And he has freaking pointy ears, right? That's the Vulcan thing, and because with the budget that they had for that, for all of their aliens, they had to be almost entirely human looking, except for one very mild makeup difference, and that was the Vulcan makeup difference.
And that's true throughout many series too, right? They're all always humanoid. There is an episode in The Next Generation where they explain why all the alien creatures seem to be humanoid. Great episode.
That was an epic episode, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, there we have it. To Say Nothing of the Dog by Connie Willis. Seems to be kind of a controversial book in a book club. Hopefully you liked it, if you did read along. Next, we are reading A Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. But our next episode, it'll be out next week, and it is a conversation with Peter Watts. This guy is just amazing. We had a great conversation with him. It was super fun, so look out for that episode. Thanks for joining.